Welcome back. This is the Weekly Business Hour. I'm Rick Schissler. We've been having a wonderful conversation, at least in my mind, hopefully in yours, with my friend Chuck K. How about that? See? Chuck and I have been talking about, a lot of different things about business scenarios. And I thought we'd start off this section of the show and talk a little bit about the process. I mean, Chuck's a coach, mentor, consultant, different names, but, as a business coach, talk about some of the things that you focus on when you're working with a client.
Well, a lot of it, I like to get down to the foundation. I mean, and I understand that back in the 80s, 90s, it was real popular. Everybody had to have values. And I still believe in it, not just to go ahead and have a list of things that you put up on the wall, but, what does your company really believe in? And are you using them? And the first thing you do is you ask an employee, oh, no, yeah, those are just something that we put on the wall. Because if you're using them to go ahead and as the prism through which you look to make all your decisions, to go ahead and interact with your customers, to interact with your suppliers and your employees, it shows something. It's because that's when we go ahead and then start looking at, okay, what project, what performance metrics do you have? Does everything align? Because when something's misaligned, go ask a chiropractor. When something's misaligned, you're going to go ahead and feel the pain. Maybe not today, but certainly down the road. So I like to talk about what are your values. I like to go ahead and say, what's the vision? Well, I just want to get bigger. Anybody can get bigger, and there's a lot of ways to go ahead and do it, but is that really what you want? So having those conversations and making sure people, business leaders of all levels, whether it's the founder, an entrepreneur, it could be a department head, can articulate what it is they're trying to go ahead and do. I mean, that's always step one. Because if you can't go ahead and set your destination, how do you go ahead and set a direction to get there? So it's really important to go ahead and do that. And once we kind of have that understanding, and that can be a conversation, could be something we dig into, then we start saying, what are your problems? And just because the business owner, the business leader sees a problem, might not be their exact problem. I was working with a $20 million educational furniture manufacturer a little while back, and I want lean. I want to go ahead and put in lean. Big lean proponent. I think there's a lot of wonderful things. But do we have to go ahead and jump through every little name? So I said, what is it you really want? Do you mind if I tour your facility? Absolutely. So I did. So as I'm touring the facility, I see the vice president of operations moving materials from one place to another. So after he finishes, I stop. I say, hey, I get introduced. So, what are you going to do next? He says, well, I'm going to see if anyone else needs materials. I'm going to be looking around. And I said, well, that's what concerns me. He said, what do you mean? I said, as a leader, I think it's great that leaders jump in at any level and they can go ahead and move the materials. But in some ways, that's a feel good. Yeah, it doesn't really add value. Yes, it needed to happen for the customer's perspective, but it didn't need the vice president of operations to do it. No. He had a team of material handlers. So I said, to me, it's far more important to be asking a few questions. He said, like what? Well, what prevented the material handlers from knowing that this material needed to go ahead and be moved? Or what precluded them from doing that move? Maybe they were busy with something else. Lots of reasons. But, fixing that problem, maybe there was no visibility. Maybe those materials weren't available. Maybe, they were busy doing something else. There can be 100 different reasons. But fixing that problem would really add value from that vice president's perspective, not just pushing the materials on a cart from point A to point B. And I said, if you really were checking out your actual costs versus standards, you would go ahead and see that was the most expensive materials that you guys have ever produced. Well, why is that? Because I suspect you get paid a little bit differently than what those material handlers get paid. So, I think it's important to go ahead and have those conversations. I ended up engaging with that particular organization in doing a lot of preliminary steps, setting the foundation. While I was working with them, they ended up changing out their plant manager to a guy who had a phenomenal lead experience. And he and I were talking. He's like, Chuck, before we can even do lean, we don't even have job descriptions. I said, well, funny you should ask. I said, we did that in my first 2 weeks here. He said, well, nobody told me. So I emailed them to him. He said, well, next thing we need to do, we need to talk about leader standard work. I said, well, funny you should ask. We did that in kind of week 3. He said, well, nobody told me. I said, well, so obviously now you also have a communication problem within your organization. But where their chief human resource officer had been given the task of coming up with job descriptions 2 years previously, it took us 2 weeks to do it. What did we do? We sat down with those first line supervisors. We sat down with those employees, said, tell me what your job is and describe it using, and I gave them a format. I mean, there's a million of them out there on the internet. Fill out this form. I don't care if you handwrite it. I can type. That's not a big deal. But, not just what you do, but what you should be doing and you may not be. Every one of those employees do exactly. And they filled it out, and within 2 weeks, we had job descriptions. We had leader standard work. We had all sorts of things because they wanted to be able to have employees move from one machine to another. Well, how do you do that without training? So do we have any training materials? Well, no. So I said, okay, send a supervisor with me. Let's wheel out a whiteboard I love whiteboards. Wheel a whiteboard out onto the floor, and let's go ahead and step it through with the operator. So we did. I put it into a format. I said, now the supervisor is trained to go ahead and do it. Well, he doesn't have any time. So I did it for all the machines. But now they had the training documents, and all they needed was to create the skills matrix as to how to jump from point A to point B and get the people trained and which ones are trained so we can move them around. So, yeah, they wanted lean. I knew we could go ahead and deliver lean. Actually, they ended up hiring a person who was probably even better. But it was all about, let's put the fundamentals in first. Yeah, lean might be the symptom of what you want, but let's talk about the root cause. And as business leaders, we're feeling the symptoms. We can go ahead and see that we're bleeding here. Well, let's go ahead and look a little bit deeper. And that's where I come in. I provide that perspective. All of us as leaders, we can't always see our blind spot, and we need somebody else to help us.
Well, I 100% agree with you, and I've been there and done it, but not because I've done what you've done or not done. Everybody has a different approach, but the idea that two things. One is this show, when we started the first 2 years, I kept a little poll, and all the guests I had in 2 years, 50 plus people, I tried to gauge based on the conversations, materials, and how successful they appear to be, right? And some of them were solos, some had 20 employees, some had 50, some had 5, some were growing, a mix, right? Scientifically, probably not as much as it should be. But anyway, at the end of the day, the businesses that I felt were successful. They were going to be around and they were moving forward. 95% of them, that's the number, had a mentor. Or possibly had one and they outgrew them or whatever. And when you asked them that question, because that was a question that was on every show I asked, did you have somebody help you? Will they bring up a mentor? And oddly enough, I found that basically the ones that were the most enthusiastic, now there's no way for me to measure that, about the value of that mentor, the consultant, the coach, was the ones that I sensed that really were going to go far with what they were doing. So the other thing, the first point you made about asking people their direction or where they're going, it's funny, one of the things I found out about 15 years ago, and I started doing this and really enjoy it. In fact, I haven't done much of it lately, but people want to start a business or their new business, and they'll find it hard to find somebody that will sit down and take some time and talk to them. Silver Fox Group that I'm part of, very few want to take on the new business because of the high failure rate and so on and so forth. And I do. I take those, when I was practicing full time, I would take those on, whether I made money or lost money, because I was always curious. I sit down and have a cup of coffee. I give them an hour and say, tell me about your business. Tell me why you want to do this. Tell me what your goals are. And about half of them, I will try to talk them out of going in that business or even going into business, right? And try to lay that out to them. I find that it is very, very hard, but it sounds like you've had some success, so I'm curious, in getting a business owner to really convey or put into words what their objective is. In other words, I'm going to start this business. I'm taking on these risks. This is what I'm going to do. And you ask them a question, which is a standard question for me now. Well, when do you want to exit the business? As we sit here today, what does that look like to you? Well, I want to work the rest of my career, 20 years, whatever. And they say, well, how much do you want to walk away with? In other words, what value does the business? Because a vast majority of businesses, small businesses, they just lock the door and walk away.
Right.
Right? And then we talk about buyer, and that's kind of a strategic buyer, this, that. But people have the hardest time, or many people do, not everybody, of what is it I want to do with this business? Well, my dad always claimed is most small business people, they're just looking for a job. They control versus working in an environment where they're an employee. And I always teased him. I said, well, you got a hell of a job, what you did with this business, you and the family. But the idea is they can't put it together, which I personally think puts them at a big, big disadvantage as they go down the road.
Well, I think it's a double disadvantage. And one, because in a job, most jobs, especially bigger employers, they're going to have a 401k plan. They're going to have a pension plan. They're going to have something where you put some money aside. But the entrepreneur probably is not doing that. So if they're not planning on selling their business and just close the doors, now they have nothing to fall back on. No retirement, Social Security, but that's not necessarily always enough to live on. So they need to go ahead and think that through. I've talked to a number of people now in my network who they specialize in that, in evaluating the business and how to go ahead and create that. I don't specialize in that part, but I can always make connections. But realistically, if you're documenting stuff, now you've got something to go ahead and sell, because you can sell a process. You're selling more than the tables and chairs that you sit at and your computer to go ahead and do something. You're selling more than the list of your customers, which, and nowadays with AI, with the internet, I can probably get a list of customers pretty easily. I can probably find out what your list of customers is. I mean, if I'm really hell bent on that. So that doesn't have the value that it did, let's say 20 or 30 years ago. So realistically, I think that's an important question. You need to think about your exit strategy, and the best time to think about it is when you're entering the business, is what am I going to go ahead and create, and what am I going to go ahead and do? I mean, we've all heard about the companies, whether it's a small communications company that made a modem way back in the day and were able to go ahead and sell it to Microsoft, and all of a sudden it's in every computer known to man. I mean, absolutely, those are the wonderful stories. But even the small business here and there. I just had my lawn service guy. He decided to exit the business, and he sold his business. I didn't get involved in that. But hopefully it was more than just a Rolodex of names. It was all the notes of what those customers like about their lawn, how they want their lawn cut, because that's going to go ahead and make that transition far more frictionless than otherwise. Otherwise, you're going to go ahead and struggle. Well, they didn't do the same thing that the previous guy did, and supposedly they bought the business. Well, what information got passed other than the mowers and the weed eaters?
In the Rolodex.
Yeah.
No, you make a wonderful point. Rich Hall, who is a Silver Fox advisor, specializes in working with people to sell their business, not just the sale, but building, putting the blocks and things in place over a period of years, preferably, that you get there. And the idea that I'm going to be in this business for 5 years, 10, 20, there are important decisions along the way, like borrowing money that can be impacted on what the exit strategy is. Training somebody to run the business so that you have that to sell and can appeal to that particular group of buyers who want management in place.
Right.
And you start, these are not hard questions, but it got to the point, I will say, in my practice where I wouldn't take a client on who couldn't answer those questions.
Well,
I would work with them to help them do it.
Absolutely.
But when you get that blank stare and then I don't have time, then you don't.
Well, most small business people are so busy, working between the trees, putting out the fires, whatever analogy you want to go ahead and use, that they don't get that chance to step back. Even me, when I retired from Lazy Boy and I got a chance to step back, in that first year of retirement, one of the things I did a lot was think through some of the decisions I made. Yes, I made them with the best information I had at the time. Could they have been better? Absolutely. But now I finally had something that I didn't have when I was doing the job, and that was perspective. And that's where, the mentor, the consultant, the coach, whatever you want to go ahead and term it, that's what they give, because you're going to have some blind spots. You're going to have not complete information, but sometimes somebody else can see something that you can't. And it's really important to go ahead and get that additional perspective.
It's like having somebody, as I've had people put it like this, to ask the tough questions.
Yeah.
Just somebody that is there to make sure that you succeed in a way that matches what you want to succeed. Like, even I've had issues with people, their personality, their character, their characteristics, and they want to go in this business. And I say, well, you realize heavy customer service. Well, I don't really like people that much, that's but I mean,
Right.
you can almost see that they're going to have a difficult time. Doesn't mean they're not smart, doesn't mean they can't be successful, but there's a matching that goes on to be the most efficient, and so on and so forth.
And it's always better to have that person outside the business because they don't have an agenda. They're not looking to take your spot. They're not looking to go ahead and move up the corporate ladder. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having somebody inside the business you can bounce some ideas. But again, a lot of business owners, a lot of business leaders cannot share everything because it could be a sign of weakness in today's society. It could go ahead and mean that somebody else that they're talking to might be shooting for their job. And it is. I mean, it's a dog-eat-dog society that we're in some cases, or even in corporate America. So, part of it is to have somebody who really doesn't care about all that noise and is just focused on you and wanting your business to be the best business that it can be.
Right. And if it's you, your family,
Right.
that's a whole nother discussion with your family and their involvement and so on and so forth. No, I mean, you're dead on, and I encourage people every time I get an opportunity, and on the show a number of times, to bring a mentor coach on board, whatever the relationship and what you can afford or whatever you can, because to me it's one of those things you cannot afford not to do it. It really is.
Right.
It may seem a little, like silly putty. You really can't get your hands on it, but it is really something different. Again, 95% of the people I just at random in Montgomery County that I could peg as potentially successful in what they were doing had a mentor.
Right.
And again, some of them gave credit to those people. And you read those stories. I mean, I know it's true.
Yeah.
Maybe not everybody, but it's there. It makes all the difference. The big guys have these people because they got thousands of people, and they can find somebody or go outside and hire one of those big dollar, huge consulting companies. But it's there for the small business as well.
Absolutely.
Makes your journey more pleasant, makes your journey more successful for what you're looking for. And that's big in my mind. You and your family, what it is that you're looking for. And we're all different. And that's one of the reasons people go in business. I went in business because I was looking for something different. After being part of a successful family business, I said, well, I've got 30 years of education. Now I'm going to go try to use that and see what I can do.
Absolutely.
We've got a couple minutes left. I wanted to touch, again, you've written a book, and we haven't really talked about it. Who should read this book?
Anyone who can't sleep at night? No, realistically. Small business leaders. I wrote it, I wrote it in such a way that you don't have to read it cover to cover. You can go ahead and find a problem that you're having, find a similar problem in the book, and look at the perspective that I give, the potential solutions, the alternatives, the things that you can look at. If you're struggling with a certain area, you can go to a certain part of the book and say, well, this isn't working for me. Oh, here's some ideas, or here's some tools. I hate to say tips and tricks because it's not tricks. It's putting in the blocking and tackling of business. But yeah, business leaders of all size, whether it's a department head or it's an owner, it's a CEO of a small organization, because this talks in terms of contractors, like HVAC, plumbers, and that kind of thing. Why? Because I think there's a lot of things you can learn, both good and bad, out there from all these little small businesses. And it doesn't take corporate America, it doesn't take a department of people, it doesn't take $100,000 to solve the problems.
Well, and I haven't read the book, so I've let everybody know that, but I've kind of looked through online and your principles and whatnot that you adhere to. It is not one of these books that come about all the time, it seems, especially in marketing. The latest and greatest idea, and it's here today, gone tomorrow. And I used to run into people say, are you doing XYZ, that book that was written on the New York Times bestseller list? And I said, well, no, I haven't got. This is a book about basics, as you call it, blocking and tackling. And it has ideas that can help you. From my take on it, I'm going to read it, but is that it helps you solve everyday real problems.
I think from what some of the reviewers have said, it's very pragmatic.
Yeah, it's a good tool. I encourage people to check it out. It's available on Amazon as well as at your website. And speaking of that, if people want to get in touch with you, talk about what we talked about today, or perhaps engage you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, if you want to learn more about me, go out to my website. It's 13ten.com, 13ten.com, 1310. I'm on LinkedIn, pretty regular. You can go ahead and shoot me an email at chuck@1310.com. And yeah, I don't answer everything immediately because I don't sit at my computer. I'm usually trying to help people. But yeah, within a day or so, you'll get a response back, because I am checking it on my phone no matter what my wife says. And I'll go ahead and shoot a response, and we'll try and go ahead and set up a time to chat. Because again, I think being able to be interactive rather than kind of asynchronous that texting or email is, it's better to go ahead and be far more interactive in real time, and have a chat, whether that's a phone call, a Zoom call, whatever works. But yeah, I'd love to go ahead and talk to any of your listeners and have those conversations. Maybe it's a fit, maybe it's not. And, maybe you'll learn something. Even if it's not a fit, we're not looking to go ahead and charge. I do this more as a purpose in my life. Yeah, I like to make a couple dollars. But, I don't let the dollars go ahead and dictate everything either.
Right. Well, Chuck, I can't thank you enough. And I want to extend that invitation to you. You're welcome back anytime. If you've got a new subject or something you think people would benefit, just reach out to me, because you've got a lot of good things here, a lot of basic things, but small business people, most of us, many of us, need to be reminded of. In a sense, my take on it, we've been leaving things on the table, money, success, and whatnot, because we don't have the tools or the knowledge or experience or someone helping direct us in the right direction. And it's right there. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for joining us today. Put a note on your calendar. Next week, 11 a.m., right here on Lone Star Community Radio. We'll be back. And a video podcast of today's show will be posted in the next 48 to 72 hours. Just go to Facebook, YouTube, all the social media sites. Look for the weekly business hour page, and you'll find a posting of this show and a number of them going back quite a while. And as I tell you each week when we do this show, Until next week, stay engaged and always keep your focus on what counts in your business.